You just spent $121 million on a single plane. It hasn't even left the ground yet. Welcome to the airline business, the industry where billionaires go broke, and broke dreamers become billionaires. There's no in-between. You want to own an airline? Let's talk numbers. Real numbers. Not the fairy tale where you're sipping champagne in first class while your bank account fills up. The truth is uglier and way more interesting. Here's the first gut punch. A single Boeing 737 MAX 8 costs you somewhere around $121 million, fresh off the line. Brand new, shiny, smells like victory. You don't have that kind of cash lying around? Nobody does. So you lease instead. That'll run you about 400 grand a month per plane. And that's before it even burns a drop of fuel. You need more than one plane to run an airline. You need a fleet. 10 planes, minimum, if you want to look like a real operator and not some regional joke. Do the math. That's millions of dollars leaving your account before a single passenger buys a ticket. Stop scrolling for a second. If this kind of raw business breakdown gets you fired up, hit subscribe right now. Smash that like button too. It genuinely helps this channel keep digging up the numbers nobody else shows you. Now here's where it gets brutal. Fuel. Airlines burn through fuel like it's water, except this water costs a fortune, and the price swings every single week, depending on wars, sanctions, and OPEC's mood that morning. Fuel alone can eat up almost a third of your total operating costs. One bad month in the Middle East, one pipeline attack, one geopolitical tantrum, and your fuel bill just doubled. You didn't do anything wrong. The world just changed the rules on you. Spirit Airlines learned this the hard way. Their whole restructuring plan got built around jet fuel sitting near $2 a gallon. Then prices blew past $4 a gallon in a matter of months. That single swing helped bury one of America's biggest budget carriers for good. Remember that number next time someone tells you fuel hedging is optional. And you're still not done spending. Labor costs come next. Pilots, flight attendants, ground crew, mechanics, dispatchers, air traffic coordination fees. Each pilot alone can cost you hundreds of thousands a year once you add training, certification, and union contracts. You can't cut corners here either. A tired pilot or an undertrained mechanic isn't a cost saving, it's a headline waiting to happen. One small U.S. charter operator actually got its license pulled this year after regulators found the owners faked pilot training records just to dodge safety audits. That's not a rumor. That's the FAA shutting a company down overnight. Then airport fees. Landing slots at major hubs like JFK or LAX aren't just expensive, they're basically real estate wars. Some of the best slots at the busiest airports are so limited that airlines have literally paid tens of millions just for the right to land there. You want a good time slot at a major city? Get in line behind Delta, American, and United, who've been hoarding these slots for decades. And if you're not flying a hub-and-spoke model, you're stuck fighting for scraps at secondary airports, where demand is softer and yields are lower. Maintenance is next on the bill. Every single aircraft needs constant checks, daily checks, weekly checks, heavy checks every few years that can ground a plane for weeks and cost millions. Skip one, and the FAA doesn't just fine you, they shut you down. Now throw insurance into the mix. Hull insurance, liability insurance, war risk coverage if you fly anywhere near a conflict zone. Premiums have been climbing for years, and one serious incident anywhere in the industry can spike rates for everybody, even airlines with a perfect safety record. You're basically paying a tax on other people's bad luck. So let's pause and add it up in your head. Aircraft, fuel, crew, airport fees, maintenance, insurance, marketing, booking systems, ground handling. You haven't turned a profit yet. You haven't even sold your first ticket. This is the part nobody tells you before they romanticize owning an airline. Here's a stat that'll wake you up. IATA, the folks who track the entire global airline industry, expected airlines worldwide to pull in $41 billion in profit for 2026. Sounds massive, right? Except that's spread across an industry pulling in over $1 trillion in revenue. That works out to a margin of under 4%. Then Middle East disruptions and a spike in fuel prices hit, and IATA slashed that forecast almost in half, down to around $23 billion, with margins crushed to roughly 2%. Let that sink in. The entire global airline industry, every single carrier combined, runs on a profit margin thinner than your neighborhood coffee shop. Willie Walsh, the Director General of IATA, straight up called those margins a pittance, considering the value airlines create for the world. That's the head of the world's biggest airline association, admitting this business barely pays. You still in? Good. Because here's where the real risk lives. One war, one pandemic, one volcano erupting in the wrong spot, one software glitch grounding your entire fleet for a day. Any of these can wipe out a year of profit in a single afternoon. Remember 2020? The industry lost over $137 billion in a single year. Planes sat parked on runways like abandoned toys, while airlines bled cash just to keep the lights on. And it's not just history. 2026 has been brutal for smaller carriers. Iceland's Play Airlines shut down completely. Sweden's Braathens Aviation filed for bankruptcy. A Chinese regional carrier called Joy Air grounded its whole fleet and entered restructuring. A charter airline in Slovenia folded. Another in Sweden lost its operating license entirely. None of these were tiny startups run out of a garage. These were real, operating airlines with real routes and real customers, and they still couldn't outrun thin margins and rising fuel costs. Spirit Airlines is the biggest cautionary tale of them all. America's largest ultra-low-cost carrier filed for bankruptcy in late 2024, clawed its way out in early 2025, and then filed again just months later in August 2025. By May 2026, it shut down for good. One aviation analyst summed it up perfectly. He said, "When you're a low-cost carrier, your entire business depends on having a cost advantage, and Spirit simply didn't have one anymore." Another well-known industry voice, Brett Snyder of Cranky Flyer, warned early on that the ultra-low-cost model itself might be dying out. That's the risk you're signing up for. High stakes, thin margins, and forces completely outside your control. But here's the twist. People still do it. People still buy into this brutal business, year after year, because when it works, it really works. Load factors, meaning how full your planes fly, are hitting record highs. Airlines in 2026 are expected to fill close to 84% of every seat on every flight. That's not an accident. That's smart pricing, smart routing, and squeezing every possible dollar out of every seat. Ancillary revenue, the money from baggage fees, seat upgrades, and extra legroom, is projected to hit around $145 billion industry-wide. That's the stuff that actually keeps a lot of these airlines alive. The ticket barely covers the flight. The fees are where the real money hides. Smart owners don't fight the thin margins. They stack revenue streams on top of each other until the numbers finally tilt in their favor. Quick gut check before we go further. Would you rather own 10 planes with thin margins, or one plane completely paid off with zero risk? Drop your answer in the comments. I actually read them. Route planning deserves its own conversation too. Picking where to fly isn't just about demand. It's about competition density, fuel stops, crew base locations, and whether the airport on the other end even has the infrastructure to turn your plane around fast enough to make money. Fly a route with too much competition, and you're stuck in a race to the bottom on ticket prices. Fly a route nobody's touched, and you might discover in month 3 exactly why nobody was touching it. Hub and spoke networks let legacy carriers funnel passengers through a handful of massive airports, maximizing connections and squeezing more revenue per flight. Point-to-point networks, the model budget carriers love, cut out the middleman and fly direct, trading some efficiency for lower complexity and faster aircraft turnaround. Pick the wrong network strategy for your market, and no amount of marketing saves you. Cargo is another piece of the puzzle a lot of new owners completely ignore. Belly cargo space on passenger planes generates real revenue, especially on international routes. IATA projects global air cargo volumes climbing past 71 million tons in 2026, driven largely by e-commerce demand. That's freight nobody's watching on the evening news, quietly padding out the bottom line of airlines smart enough to sell that space instead of flying it empty. Loyalty programs matter more than most passengers realize too. For a lot of major carriers, the Miles and Points program isn't just a customer perk. It's practically a separate business that sells miles to credit card companies and banks for real cash, often generating profit even in years the airline itself is losing money on ticket sales. That's a revenue stream a brand new airline simply doesn't have access to on day one. And it's part of why scale matters so much in this industry. The bigger you get, the more financial levers you have to pull when ticket revenue alone isn't cutting it. Let's talk financing for a second, because this is where a lot of new owners get crushed before they even take off. Very few airlines pay cash for their fleet. Most lean on a mix of leasing, bank debt, and aircraft-backed loans. Debt is basically the oxygen of this industry. But debt on an asset that loses value every year, in a business with 2% margins, is a dangerous cocktail. Spirit Airlines was still carrying over $2 billion in long-term debt and lease obligations when it filed for bankruptcy the second time. That's the kind of number that sounds abstract until it's your name on the loan. Now let's talk about the exit. Because owning an airline isn't just about running it. It's about what happens when you sell, merge, or fold. Aircraft depreciate, sure, but they don't crash to zero overnight. A well-maintained plane holds real resale value, especially with global demand for used narrow-body jets still climbing, because new aircraft deliveries from Boeing and Airbus keep getting delayed. Supply chain issues mean used planes are worth more than they used to be. That's one silver lining hiding inside all this chaos. Experts in aviation finance keep repeating the same warning, though. Return on invested capital in this industry, even in a good year, sits below the actual cost of capital. In plain English, that means even when airlines make money, they're often not making enough to justify the massive risk investors took to fund them in the first place. That's why so many airline billionaires didn't start in aviation. They funneled money from other empires into planes, treated it like a prestige project, and accepted lower returns because the industry gave them something cash alone couldn't: power, visibility, a seat at the global table. There's also the human side of this business that spreadsheets never capture. Crew morale, customer trust, brand reputation. Spirit's reputation for nickel-and-diming passengers meant a lot of flyers never came back, even once the airline started offering competitive fares again. Trust, once burned, doesn't rebuild itself with a sale on baggage fees. That's a lesson every single owner in this industry eventually learns, usually the hard way. So why do people keep buying into an industry that barely breaks even? Because when a fuel price drops, when demand spikes after a rough year, when a hub airport opens up new slots, the payoff isn't just profit, it's influence. It's control over how millions of people move around the planet. It's your logo on a tail cutting through clouds over 6 continents. Let's zoom out for a second and talk strategy. Because not every airline plays the same game. Legacy carriers like Delta and United lean on premium cabins, loyalty programs, and global alliances to pad those thin margins with high-spending business travelers. Budget carriers like Spirit, Frontier, and Allegiant went the other direction, stripping the ticket down to bare bones and charging extra for literally everything else. Both strategies can work. Both strategies can also collapse the second fuel prices spike or a competitor undercuts your fares. There's no permanent winning formula here. Just constant adjustment. Now let's talk about something most people never even think about: regulation. Every route you fly, every country you touch, comes wrapped in paperwork. Bilateral air service agreements decide which airlines from which countries are even allowed to fly certain international routes. Slot restrictions, noise curfews, environmental fees, carbon offset requirements, all of it adds cost, and all of it can change overnight based on a single government decision. You could plan a route for 2 years, only to have a new regulation kill its profitability before your first flight even takes off. Taxes hit different too. Airlines get taxed on fuel in some countries and not others. Ticket taxes, passenger facility charges, security fees, they all get tacked onto the price you charge, whether your margins can absorb it or not. Governments love taxing air travel because passengers rarely notice a few extra dollars buried in the fine print. You will notice, though, when it's eating into your bottom line every single quarter. Technology is another silent cost center. Booking engines, revenue management software, crew scheduling systems, maintenance tracking platforms, none of this is optional in 2026. A modern airline runs on data just as much as it runs on jet fuel. Get your pricing algorithm wrong by even a few percentage points across a whole year of flights, and you've either left millions on the table or scared away half your customers with fares nobody wants to pay. Here's something interesting, though. Not every airline story ends in bankruptcy court. Southwest Airlines started with just a handful of planes flying short routes inside Texas, refused to overextend early, kept costs brutally simple with a single aircraft type, and turned that discipline into decades of profitability most legacy carriers could only dream about. Ryanair in Europe built an entire empire on the same philosophy. Fly the plane as many hours a day as physically possible, keep turnaround times insanely short, and never, ever let costs creep up faster than revenue. These airlines didn't get lucky. They got disciplined, and they stayed disciplined long after the excitement of launch day wore off. That's the real lesson hiding underneath all these numbers. The airlines that survive aren't the ones with the fanciest planes or the flashiest routes. They're the ones obsessed with cost control, down to the last gallon of fuel and the last minute of ground time. Robert Mann, an aviation consultant who's tracked this industry for decades, put it simply when discussing struggling carriers. Without real structural fixes, he said liquidation becomes the likely outcome. That's not pessimism. That's just math catching up with a business model that stopped working. This business isn't for the faint-hearted. It's for people who can stomach thin margins, brutal volatility, and years where the only thing you're managing is damage control. But for the ones who survive the turbulence, and yeah, that word fits perfectly here, the reward isn't just money. It's legacy. Before you go, here's the one thing to actually take away from all this. If you're serious about ever building wealth in a capital-heavy industry like this one, start small. Don't dream about owning 10 planes on day one. Study how regional carriers scaled slowly, watch how they controlled costs before chasing growth, and understand your break-even load factor before you sign a single lease. That discipline is the real difference between the airlines that make headlines for going bankrupt and the ones still flying 30 years later. Numbers don't lie in this business. They just wait patiently for owners who ignore them to find out the hard way. If this broke down something you always wondered about, smash that like button, subscribe for more of these deep dives, and let me know in the comments what business you want the real economics of next.